Hi, good morning, everyone. We'll get started soon. Just going to wait a couple more minutes for more people to join. All right, we'll give it one more minute. Still got people coming into the webinar. So we'll start in 1 minute. Okay, it's now 1:03. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Concepts webinar for the Slauson Corridor Transit Neighborhood Plan. This is a long-range land use planning effort centered around the future bike path along Slauson. My name is Stephen Kadikbak with Los Angeles City Planning. I'm the project manager for the Slauson TNP, and the other member of this team is Andrew Pacias. So first off, we want to thank you for joining us today. We hope you and your families are safe. We know there's a lot of uncertainty right now, not only with the health risk out there, but also in terms of housing and job security. And the disparities were already big in the community, so the effect of this pandemic brings up a lot of question marks going forward. So our role as planners is to plan the long-term vision for land uses, but also consider the social equity and health factors as well. And the difficult part for us and for everyone out there is that there's just a lot of unknowns with how the pandemic will change the way that we live in cities. So with that said, before we get started, wanted to share some important local resources related to COVID-19. So if you're not already aware, the city has an official coronavirus website, which has the latest information about testing, Mayor Garcetti's directives, and other resources that you can sign up to be notified about. Additionally, if you live in Council District 8 or 9 in South LA, we recommend also signing up for your council members' e-newsletters, which are sent out pretty frequently and contain useful information at the community level. I also wanted to point out some key services being provided by some local organizations. Trust South LA is currently distributing free meals at their headquarters Monday to Wednesday, noon to 2 p.m. Meanwhile, Sage is also continuing to provide important services for tenants at risk of eviction, and they have a helpline number, as well as a weekly Facebook Live tenant clinic. So please feel free to reach out to those organizations and check out their websites for more information. In terms of this concepts webinar, so you're currently tuned in to the English session. We have a simultaneous Spanish session going on. And shortly in a bit, both sessions will play a presentation that will last about 20 minutes. Then from there, we'll do a live question and answer session. So we encourage you to submit your questions into the questions box that is located toward the bottom of your control panel. Submitting questions during the presentation is encouraged as well. The control panel generally will allow you to configure your audio options, but we recommend having computer audio selected. But if for some reason you experience audio issues with the presentation or the webinar in general, please reach out to me afterward and we'll help you out. Also know that we will be making the presentation available after. But before we start the presentation, I'm going to launch a quick interactive poll just to get a sense of the audience. And you could respond simply by clicking your answer on the screen. Okay, so prior to this webinar, did you know that a bike path was being planned for on Slauson? Give it a couple seconds. Okay, gonna end it in 3, 2, 1. Okay, interesting. So the results, most people know about Metro's future bike path on Slauson. That's good to know. I'm going to launch one more poll question. How did you hear about this webinar? So I'll give this a couple seconds. Okay, interesting. So most people heard about this event through their email or newsletter. And a lot of people also heard about this through word of mouth. Interesting. Okay, this is useful. We can take this information back. Okay, so with that, I'm going to start the presentation. Just give me one moment. Welcome to the Concepts webinar for the Slauson Corridor Transit Neighborhood Plan, or TNP for short. This is a land use planning effort focused in and around the future bike path that will run along Slauson, with the goals of planning for transit, planning for jobs, and activating the bike path through land use and building design. The intent of this Concepts webinar is to keep the community informed about the progress of the TNP and invite further feedback about proposed land use concepts. No decisions will be made today. At this stage, the TNP has not released an official draft plan with technical zoning details. Right now, this is still the concepts phase, where we are sharing out with the community the comments we've heard thus far and how it shaped the plan to this point. Today I'll go over some background about the TNP, the study area of where we're talking about, and then go into how the goals of the plan and the previous outreach have informed the proposed concepts. Then I'll close with other initiatives focused around Slauson and next steps to collect your feedback. So, if you're new to the Slauson TNP, we'll start with some brief background. Slauson Avenue runs east-west through South LA. It's historically been the center of a lot of industrial activity and today is a major corridor for jobs. For years, there have been railroad tracks on Slauson that have not been in use. LA Metro actually acquired that abandoned right-of-way and then conducted a feasibility study. And they determined that a bike and pedestrian path would provide multiple benefits for the community as well as Metro's regional network. So Metro is calling this their rail-to-rail project. They're planning to replace the rail tracks with a bike and pedestrian path that is separated from cars traveling on Slauson. The path will also include street trees, landscaping, lighting, and security features, and Metro's current target date for completing the path is 2022. So LA Metro is the agency responsible for the bike path. On the other hand, my department, LA City Planning, was awarded a grant by Metro to do land use planning, specifically around their future bike path. And this land use effort is what we're calling the Slauson Corridor TNP, which again aims to activate the bike path through land use and building design, plan for jobs, and plan around transit. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to focus on the TNP land use planning effort that my team is working on. And we have a web page up on the LA City Planning website, available also in Spanish, where you can learn more and sign up for important email updates. So the Slauson TNP is a work program that follows some major city planning initiatives in South LA, specifically the 3 South community plans that were adopted by the City Council in 2016 and 2017. The South Community Plan updates resulted in overarching land use policies, zoning changes, and implementation overlays that are intended to guide growth and development and set the vision for healthy and sustainable neighborhoods in South LA. So compared to the 3 community plan areas, which encompass large swaths of South LA, the Slauson TNP is a smaller, more targeted effort that's just focused in and around Metro's future bike path. Through additional land use regulations, the TNP aims to implement the community plan's vision for healthy and sustainable neighborhoods along Slauson. The technical changes involved with the Slauson TNP will include amendments to the implementation overlay documents that were adopted with the South community plans. We want to create new design guidelines for properties next to the bike path. The TNP will also include zone changes and general plan amendments to reflect the city's new zoning system and land use designations. So let's discuss the Slauson TNP study area a bit more, which is the area of analysis that this effort will focus on. This map shows the TNP study area in orange. It spans about 6 miles long from West Boulevard, which borders the city of Inglewood, then it stretches all the way to Alameda Street, which borders the cities of Vernon and Huntington Park. In terms of demographics, the study area is comprised primarily of Latino and Black residents and is predominantly a renter community. So here in red, the planned alignment of the bike path will run primarily along Slauson until it dips southwest on the diagonal between Hyde Park Boulevard and Southwest Drive. The TNP study area includes properties that will be on either side of the future bike path within the City of LA boundary. The TNP study area also captures a half-mile radius around 3 metro stations within the City of LA boundary. These 3 metro stations include the Fairview Heights station area of the future Crenshaw LAX line. Then you have the Slauson station of the Silver Line J line that's on the 110 freeway, and then the Slauson station of the Blue Line/A line. So when the bike path gets built, it'll play a key role in connecting these 3 metro stations. Lastly, the TNP study area includes 2 industrial hubs, the Slauson Western Hub and the Goodyear Track, both of which are key job generators for the area. The bike path will also feed into these hubs, providing an additional commute option for those who work there.
Okay, let's move on to the goals of the TNP and the public outreach that's been done so far. The TNP has three primary goals. The first is to activate the bike path through land use and building design, making sure that bicyclists and pedestrians have access to places and destinations along the path. The second goal is to plan for jobs, ideally green and clean jobs that align with the Mayor's Green New Deal, the Plan for Healthy LA, and the policies of the South Community Plans. And lastly, the third goal is to plan around transit, ensuring that there are adequate jobs and housing around our public transportation network, which will result in fewer vehicle trips and fewer greenhouse gas emissions, helping our city further reach our climate goals. To recap where we started, the TNP work program officially launched in September 2018. We spent our first year doing public outreach, which included briefing neighborhood councils, local organizations, attending community events, and hosting kickoff workshops. From our outreach thus far, we heard a lot of good, meaningful comments from the community, and we've compiled all of those comments into a summary document that's available on our website in English and Spanish. One of the major topics we heard was about affordable housing and concerns about displacement. There are a myriad of approaches that can help address these concerns, but I wanted to highlight some key affordable housing tools that LA City Planning specifically is involved in implementing. And these are tools that advance the city's affordable housing goals and are applicable in the TNP study area. For one, the city passed an affordable housing linkage fee in 2017, and this fee is assessed on new development to pay for new affordable housing units or to preserve existing ones. Secondly, incentive programs like density bonus and transit-oriented communities have increased the city's supply of affordable units. As part of these programs, new buildings set aside a percentage of their units as covenanted affordable in exchange for additional development rights. Additionally, the 3 South Community Plans created a regulatory tool called a Community Plan Implementation Overlay, or CPIO, which designated various sub-areas with varying levels of land use regulations to help implement the goals and policies of the community plans. And these sub-areas happen to overlap with portions of the TNP study area. The CPIOs outline affordable housing provisions for certain areas around transit, as well as design standards and use regulations for new buildings. Then there's a new state Senate bill, SB 330, that became effective in 2020, and it includes a specific tenant protection for the right to return, allowing low-income tenants of a demolished building the opportunity to move into a new affordable unit in the new building. Then lastly, another new state bill, AB 1763, grants 100% affordable housing projects more project incentives, which will make it easier for these projects to pencil out and produce much-needed affordable units. Okay, now we'll present our proposed concepts for the TNP. So we heard a lot of good comments that fed directly into the TNP's 3 goals, and we've translated that feedback into concepts under each of those goals, which I'll walk through one by one, starting with this first goal of activating the bike path. So we heard feedback that emphasized the desire for more neighborhood serving uses like grocery stores or restaurants, and then also making sure that neighborhoods have better pedestrian connectivity and public space opportunities. So based on that feedback, we created a concept map that displays sites that can help activate the future bike path through land use and building design. Areas in pink are sites that are adjacent to the future bike path, and these sites can serve as important destinations for those neighborhood serving uses. With the TNP, there's an opportunity to create new design guidelines so that new buildings along the path can provide that pedestrian and bike connectivity. And I'll illustrate what I mean using an example. Take this lot on Slauson. In the future, it'll be right up against Metro's bike path, but right now it's a dirt lot being used for parked cars. But one day, it might be a new building that provides jobs and services. If that were to happen, we would want that new building to provide a facade that faces the path and that's both functional and attractive. By requiring that windows face the path, It would provide another level of eyes and reinforce a sense of safety. Also, we would want the new building to provide an access point for bikes and pedestrians. It would help the bike path not only be for recreation, but also a viable commute option for jobs along the corridor. Another way of activating the bike path includes making sure that it can one day provide a direct connection to the Crenshaw Line station at Fairview Heights. And I'll zoom into this area I'm talking about. It's a little hard to tell from this map. So what we do know about the future bike path is that unfortunately it will end abruptly at 11th Avenue, and bicyclists will be diverted onto local streets. So in other words, in order to reach the station, bicyclists will have to continue on 67th in mixed traffic and then turn left onto West Boulevard onto a bike lane to reach the Fairview Heights station. So ideally, instead, we would want the future bike path to continue down diagonally until it reaches the Fairview Heights station directly. However, right now, there's no space for a direct bike path connection because the Crenshaw Line tracks are right up against private property. However, with the TNP, we can explore a zoning provision for new buildings that will create enough space someday for the bike path to make that direct connection to the station. Okay, so that was our first goal. Our second goal is planning for jobs, ensuring that Slauson remains a thriving corridor for employment. We heard from the community that there's a desire for greener, cleaner land uses, especially for areas where industrial activity is next to existing housing. Also, we heard there's a desire for industries that foster local entrepreneurship. So areas on this map show our proposed concepts for this goal. And starting with the dark blue areas, they represent those two clusters of industrial activity that we want to continue prioritizing as employment hubs. And as an example, so currently, to the right of the supermarket is a site that looks like it's being used for car storage. A use like that doesn't necessarily provide a large number of jobs on site. But hypothetically, if a new building gets built, it could provide more job opportunities that support those desired green industries. Areas in light blue on this concept map would continue allowing for light industrial uses along the corridor, which could include offices. We would want new industrial or office buildings on Slauson to support green jobs while also again providing an access point from the bike path for their workers. Areas in dark purple represent a hybrid industrial concept, which provides flexibility for jobs and/or housing. And if it's jobs, we would want new buildings to provide good opportunities that could benefit the local workforce. And then this area in light purple through Hyde Park envisions a cleantech jobs corridor. Cleantech jobs and open space were sentiments that were emphasized by the Hyde Park community during the update of the West Adams Community Plan. So we are reinforcing the community's vision here for the TNP. And in terms of what that could look like, it could mean new buildings for green industries that also include opportunities for publicly accessible open space. Moving on to our third goal. So our third and final goal is to plan around public transit. We heard there is a desire to concentrate new development around transit, especially along commercial streets. Also, making sure that housing and industrial uses can coexist harmoniously, and that new development feels compatible with the existing neighborhood. So the concepts map for this goal is centered around those three station areas for the Crenshaw Line, Silver Line, and Blue Line. The areas in dark purple were carrying over that hybrid industrial concept as it relates to the Metro Blue Line station area. Specifically, in that station area, there's currently a mix of residential and industrial uses in close proximity to one another, which can be detrimental for residents who are exposed to potential pollutants. But we hope that through the TNP, the station area can one day provide greener jobs, enclosed industrial uses, alongside housing that can all coexist harmoniously. Buildings could be flexible enough to incorporate both residential and non-residential uses, providing both jobs and housing near the metro station. Areas in red on the map would continue the community plan's vision for commercial corridors that could allow for mixed-use buildings. And mixed-use buildings would involve mixed-income housing on the upper stories and include neighborhood serving uses on the ground floor, which could include something like a healthy food store, for example. For all the station areas in this beige color, we're promoting a missing middle housing concept, which would allow for low-density multifamily housing within a half-mile of public transit. Missing middle refers to a range of housing typologies that provide more units than a single-family home but don't rise to the scale of a full-blown apartment. Specifically, this could include structures like accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, and these can be built within the existing neighborhood scale while providing those housing opportunities near transit. Accessory dwelling units, or ADUs specifically, are smaller units that are usually conversions of garages into living space, but can also be built from the ground up. ADUs are something that California state law and the city has been promoting as a way to increase housing opportunities with minimal impact to neighborhood scale. Fourplexes are a typology that provides up to 4 units on a lot, which further increases housing opportunities near transit without rising to a level of a full-blown apartment in existing lower density neighborhoods. So all these concepts we've presented can be viewed in more detail on an interactive story map tool we've created. On the story map website, you'll have the ability to zoom in on certain areas, click on properties, and get existing land use and zoning information. The TNP and LA City Planning in general can regulate land use through zoning, but zoning is just one tool among many that could help foster sustainable and equitable communities. That's why I'm excited to talk about another exciting related effort also focused on Slauson. The South LA Climate Commons is a partnership between a handful of organizations in South LA that are working to engage with the Slauson community on the topics of climate justice, displacement avoidance, and workforce development. The goal of the engagement is to position the partnership to apply for a larger implementation grant worth millions that could pay for things like infrastructure improvements, street trees, and potentially assistance programs for renters and businesses. If you're interested in getting involved with this effort, currently the partnership has an online interest form out right now. We encourage those who live or work in South LA to fill it out. So on top of that effort, another planning effort on Slauson is forthcoming, being led by the LA County Department of Regional Planning. Their goal is to create a transit-oriented specific plan which will focus on the Slauson Station area of the Blue Line in the Florence Firestone community. This will cover the area south of Slauson Avenue and east of Compton Avenue, which is just on the other side of the TNP study area. In terms of next steps, our next steps include getting your feedback on the concepts we presented today. And we know that online outreach can only go so far, so our hope is to do a workshop in the future, hopefully when it's safe to do so. But until then, we'll develop ways to collect feedback through other formats, whether that's virtual office hours or some other digital platform. And later on in the year, the TNP team will then work on developing the technical aspects of the plan that will inform the official draft of the plan, which you will also have the opportunity to provide feedback on. Then further down the line, we'll have a public hearing, then start the plan adoption process with the Planning Commission and City Council. After this webinar, we'll follow up with a TNP survey form to help us capture your feedback on these proposed concepts. We'll also share the interest form for the South LA Climate Commons. And we'll also share out that interactive story map tool we mentioned, as well as a recording of the presentation that you could watch again or share with others in your community. In the meantime, here's the contact information for the Slauson TNP team. Again, my name is Steven, and Andy Pacias is the other member of this team. Please contact us if you have any other questions or if you would like to have a conversation about the Slauson TNP. Thank you, and we look forward to engaging with you.
Okay, so that concludes the presentation. Now we'll move on to Q&A. Um, Before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone that today's webinar is informational and no decisions are being made today. We do want to receive your feedback on these planning concepts. So we will put a link in the chat box for the survey and the story map to fill out on your own time. And we can also email those to folks afterwards. In terms of questions, we've already received a handful of them. You could continue to type them into the questions pane. Also want to encourage you as much as possible to focus your questions on the planning concepts that we featured in the presentation, so we can consider your feedback, how your feedback can shape the plan. And I know we've got a lot of questions already about audio issues, so we apologize. Hopefully you could hear me better. And if you weren't able to hear the presentation, we'll make the presentation available afterward and can also chat with you about that. Additionally, we are doing live translations for a separate Spanish webinar. So we might momentarily pause here and there just to give the translation a moment to catch up. Okay. So we got one question here from Masha about Slauson as it pertains to the portion between La Brea and La Cienega. So that area, as you mentioned, is outside. Okay. One moment. I'm just getting note from our Spanish webinar that they're just finishing up on their end. So I'll just give them another minute or so that we could sync up. Thank you. Okay, so we'll continue with the Q&A here now that we're synced up with the Spanish. So Masha asks about the portion of Slauson between La Brea and La Cienega and the traffic situation. So yeah, that portion is not within our study area, so there's not a lot we could do there, but I could follow up with you afterward to see what other departments in the city, maybe LADOT, Department of Transportation, has something planned for that area. Okay. Deborah asks, what measures will you take for asthma patients or people with respiratory problems? So the Slauson TNP is a land use plan. So what we're dealing with is the zoning for private properties and how land use regulations will affect what could be built on sites. So maybe Deborah, I could follow up with you afterward. Maybe we could have a more in-depth conversation about how these specific concerns affect land use in the study area. Deborah also asks, will every house have access to the bike path from their backyard? Okay, that's a good question. I think property owners along the bike path will have that option. We will not make something like that mandatory, but we do want to provide that option for those properties who are abutting the bike path to have access to it. And so that goes back to figuring out what sort of design guidelines we can incorporate for new buildings so that it does speak to the path and does provide that access. Okay, Davi asks, What additional methods are being employed to continue informing the community of this large-scale planning effort? How have community meetings held in the past engaged and brought in a range of homeowners, renters, and businesses? So this webinar, I think, is one part of a larger approach now that we're all quarantined. We've got to figure out additional ways to get the word out on this effort. I think our hope is we could explore other ways of engaging with folks outside of this webinar format. So whether that's something as easy as phone calls, maybe it's virtual office hours. And I think our hope is that we could do an in-person workshops sometime down the line when it's safe. And then how have community meetings held in the past engaged? So we've held a couple workshops out in the community. What we've usually done is just find a city facility, host a workshop with display boards and additional information. And I think going forward, we'll want efforts like this to help spread the word to folks that may have not heard of this effort before, um, so that we do make sure that we're speaking to all types of stakeholders. Okay, I think I've seen this question mentioned a couple times, so I'll just provide a bulk answer for it. Why is this project being referred as rail to rail? So rail to rail is meant to it's meant to refer to the fact that this bike lane will connect two different rail stations. It'll run through it'll run along Slauson, but it'll connect the future Crenshaw Line station at Fairview Heights, and it'll connect it all the way to the Metro Blue Line, or A Line, now that it's called. So that's why it's called rail to rail. Alternatively, you might have also seen this effort being referred to as rail to river. And so Metro's branding of this effort distinguishes rail to rail from rail to river. Rail to rail is that portion on Slauson from the Crenshaw line to the Blue Line, but then the river portion is the portion of the bike path that'll extend east of the Blue Line, all the way through other jurisdictions like Huntington Park and Maywood until it finally reaches the river. So yeah, key distinction, rail to rail, segment A in the city of LA, rail to river is the entire segment, segment B all the way through Maywood and Huntington Park. Okay, next question from Nicole. Will the TOC map, Transit-Oriented Communities map, and guidelines be updated so that the length of the TNP and nearby properties are Tier 4? So the TOC, Transit-Oriented Communities, for those that aren't aware, that's a affordable housing incentive program that my department is responsible for implementing. That will not be affected by this effort, and or vice versa. That will continue to exist separately and independently of this effort. Oh, but just reading the question a little more closely, the TOC map in general is meant to be updated regularly so that it does account for service changes that Metro does to their transit system. So in general, the TOC map is intended to be updated regularly. Okay, question from Trisha. Are signage, wayfinding, and public art considered important components of this plan? So the Slauson TNP is a land use plan that can affect land use and zoning regulations. So these elements, I think, are within the spirit of the plan, but we cannot unfortunately integrate regulations for these types of things with respect to signage, wayfinding, and public art. But I think all of those things are things that we do want to see along the corridor. And I believe Metro, in their design of the bike path, might already be considering some of these elements, especially I think, with respect to wayfinding. So that might be part of their efforts. Okay. Next question from Yvonne. Will you require new buildings to plan for underground parking for expected staff and visitors so that it does not impact the surrounding neighborhoods? I think I think this is an interesting question. I think I want to flag this as useful feedback uh, that we want to hear from folks. I think how buildings decide to configure their sort of how they decide to design their building, it'll depend on a lot of things on their end. But maybe this is something we could look at, perhaps as an incentive within the plan. Okay, question from Ryan. Can you please elaborate on the missing middle housing opportunities? Okay, so missing middle is this concept that there are a range of um, housing typologies or housing types that exist, other than your traditional single family home or your 50 unit apartment building. There are typologies that exist within that. And so some of those typologies include things like accessory dwelling units or granny flats, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. And all of those typologies would provide more units than a single family home, and at the same time not rise to the scale of a full-blown apartment. And we see this concept being beneficial for some of these areas around transit, so that there are just more housing opportunities around our public transportation network. Okay, I got a question here. Does your timeline jive with the earlier presentation note that the Metro project is to be complete by 2022? Uh, yes. Our hope is that the Slauson TNP will be adopted by City Council. At the earliest, it would be 2021, probably late 2021. So we envision the plan and the bike path coming online at the same time. And I see a question here that I think my staff has answered, but I'll just repeat it for everyone. Will the city be using its power of eminent domain to develop these projects? The answer to that is no. Okay, then I got a question here from Matthew. Is there a plan for bike lanes on 67th to connect to West? Matthew, that's a good question. That's something I would need to follow up on with either Metro staff or colleagues at Department of Transportation to see what sort of active transportation improvements are being planned to accommodate that. But as far as I know, I believe that the goal is to have that to make sure that there's that connection to the station through 67th and then down a bike path on West Boulevard until you reach the Fairview Heights station of the Crenshaw line. Okay, I got a question here from Norman. What will be the allowable density in the hybrid industrial zone? So as far as the Slauson TNP goes, that level of detail has not been decided yet. That in part is what we want to hear feedback on. But today, I think the existing density, residential density, is usually, I think it's 1 unit for every 800 square feet. We could follow up on that too. Okay, got a question here from Christina. Can you please explore a mandatory inclusionary zoning requirement where 20 to 30% of the units built have to be low income and very low income? Also requiring 100% affordable on city-owned properties. Okay, this is a good question. I think the city generally has been exploring what the options for inclusionary zoning are. I know that the city council has talked about this requirement, and parts of my department have been studying it. So I'll say that it has been, it is being looked at, and I think if anything, we're going to lean on them to see what sort of comes out of that before we apply it specifically to the Slauson TNP. Okay, got a question from Johnny. Are there any available requests for projects available for this project at this time? If so, what are they? There are not any RFPs available. And Johnny, we could follow up on that too if you have more information or if you want to explain your question more in context. Got a question from Marquise. Please redo the phone numbers and email. We'll be sending out our contact information again at the end of this webinar. Okay, question from Christopher. Why are the existing tracks not being used for a light rail plus a bike path? Is it simply a budgetary decision in this very wealthy city? I think Metro, so they did a feasibility study back in 2014 once they acquired the rail track right of way. And that study in 2014 determined that a bike path was the best use. So I could refer you to that feasibility study, but I can't say I can answer that for Metro. Okay, got a question from Hakeem. What are some of the ways that the path addresses the different and rivaling gangs that are adjacent to the path? How will crime be designed out without designing people out? That's a good question, Hakeem. Um, I think that's something that we would like to get more feedback on. If there are any strategies design-wise for new buildings that could help alleviate this issue. Okay, see a question here from Christopher, the link to the interactive map. So we could send out, oh, I believe it's been sent out in the chat already if you haven't seen it. Okay, got a question here from Carl. Is there a landscaping plan associated with the plan? I think that's a good question and something worth exploring as we go forward, um, especially for properties that will be abutting the future bike path. What sort of ways can landscaping improve the user experience on the path? And this is something too that I want to talk with other parts of our city, other departments in our city that deal with landscaping specifically to see how we could integrate this into a land use plan. So that's a good comment. Okay, got a question here from Walter. Will the plan be reviewed for economic feasibility? What I can say is that the plan, as part of this effort, it involves a market study. So we are working with a market study consultant to see um, how whatever is proposed as part of this plan, how that relates to existing market conditions, future market conditions, as well as factoring like existing demographics as well. So whatever comes out of that market study can help inform what we ultimately put into a draft of the plan. Okay, question here from Olivia. What will happen to the houses around the project? So the houses will continue to remain. The city is not going to um, will not involve demolishing houses through eminent domain or some other sort of police authority. They will continue to exist as is as part of this plan. This plan is really just setting the land use and zoning regulations in place so that if a new building were to pop up, like if a property owner decided they wanted to build something along Slauson, then that new building would be subject to the new land use and zoning regulations. Okay, got another question. How will industrial properties adjacent be planned for better uses? So industrial properties, uh, right now, under current regulations, there are design guidelines for industrial uses in certain parts of the study area. And this would help make sure that future industrial uses employ uh, buffers, landscape buffers, I think requiring enclosures so that industrial activity is not just openly spilling into the air. So this would affect new buildings for industrial uses. Okay, got a question here from Kelvin. Will there be possibilities for urban agriculture, victory gardens, or even vertical gardens in repurposed warehousing? I think urban agriculture. Um, I think there's definitely a possibility that. Well, let me rephrase this. This is a land use plan, and so we can't enforce urban agriculture uses. But I don't think there would be anything as part of this plan that would preclude that from happening otherwise. And it is a good idea. And I think specifically in South LA, um, which is often called the food desert, urban agriculture would be a great industry. Okay, will the city be buying off houses along 58th Place? As part of the Slauson TNP, the city will not be buying any property. Okay, got a question here from Jonathan. Will parks and community gardens be included as part of activating the bike path? I think through zoning, we can look at ways in which publicly accessible open space can be incentivized through new development. That's definitely a possibility. I think we want to hear more from folks about how they experience open space in their community, how they want to experience open space, and we could take that back and see how we could integrate that into the zoning. Okay, got a question here from Aiden. What residential zones are being considered for Hyde Park? So with this Slauson TNP, we are planning on utilizing the city's new zoning system. So the direct answer to that is we don't know. We don't know what that zoning system or what that zoning nomenclature looks like right now, what sort of naming convention that looks like right now. I think that's something that we'll need to flesh out after this webinar and after we receive more feedback. But I think the overall goal for the Hyde Park as it relates to the bike path is to focus it more around jobs.
Hey, Stephen, this is Andy.
Yes.
Wanted to jump in here. I know we got a lot of questions in the pane. I see you have a question from the Spanish webinar that you could hopefully respond to. So this question is from Milton. And so he's wondering if the activities proposed along the bike path, how have we thought about ethnic groups and residents that make up the area?
Great. And can you just repeat that one more time?
Considering the activities proposed along the bike path, how have you thought about ethnic groups that make up the area and residents overall?
Gotcha. So as part of this land use plan, we've tried to reach out to as many groups as we can, meeting with community groups and sending out mailers to all properties. So we hope that we're reaching out to folks that way and connecting to folks that way. And I think going forward, we still want to hear from everyone, especially residents in this area, how a land use plan, how they see land uses playing out in their community, and hopefully we could take that information and create land use regulations that speak to them and speak to their concerns. Okay, I see it's 1:58 and we probably haven't even got to half of the questions in the queue. So maybe we'll go a little bit over time. I'll try and answer as many as we can. They're coming in hot and heavy, but I do want to let folks know that we'll try and find a way to answer your questions offline if we're unable to get to it on the air. Okay, got a question here from Johnny. How many community meetings have been held for the Slauson Bike Path project? How far in miles was outreach done, and how was the outreach done? So as far as outreach meetings go, for Metro, I believe they held 2 workshops a couple of years ago. They may have done more meetings. I'm not sure, but we could follow up with you on that to give you a better sense of what was talked about during those meetings. I know Metro has released some of their presentation materials that kind of talked about the feedback that they heard from their meetings as well. Okay, so it's 2 p.m. For those that want to continue hanging out with us, we'll probably stay on another 5 minutes. Just want to be respectful of people's time. Okay, got a question here from Michael. or more of a comment, tree canopy integration with Watts Rising 3,000 trees. Yeah, I think street trees is going to be an important component related to the South LA climate comments. So I think thank you for that comment. Okay, got a question here from Roberto. The dark red mixed-use zones proposed near transit stations. Will this be a significant upzoning of those areas beyond what is already allowed through TOD? So Roberto, this is a comment. This is a good comment, and we do want to hear folks' feedback about how they feel about something like that. But I could tell you that through the community plan updates, a lot of work and community outreach was done to come to the conclusion of what those how those zones should plan for mixed use. So here with the Slauson TNP, we're kind of leaning on the work and the outreach that was done by the community plan and seeing what, if any, like targeted refinements we should make for the Slauson area in particular. But the answer to that is we don't know, but we'd love to hear more of your feedback if you have any specific details. Okay, got a question here from Peter. With more and more folks traveling on bikes away from the security of a secure car cabin, how will we thwart bandits and pirates lurking along the path? I think that's going to be an important part that Metro is planning for in terms of security and operations maintenance. So we'll have to wait to see what how Metro accounts for that within their maintenance and operations plan for the bike path. Okay, I got a question here from Josie. Aside from affordable housing incentives, what regulatory tools could ensure a certain percentage of housing is affordable? So like I mentioned those incentive programs earlier in the presentation. I think other regulatory tools could include, well, I also mentioned that inclusionary zoning is something that the City Council has asked our department to study. And so that's something that is being kind of studied citywide, inclusionary zoning that would mandate a percentage of housing is affordable. Okay, question from Gabriel. Do you collect demographic information about the people who gave you input? Did you identify a specific demographic that was more heavily involved? I think demographic data, at least for this webinar, we asked for people's zip codes as an option just to see where folks are coming from. In terms of economic demographics, I think in our previous workshops, we did have an option for an optional option to ask folks what sort of income bracket they fell under, so we could get a sense of the populations we're dealing with, and we could share that out as well as part of that outreach summary we talked about. Okay, question from Dorothy. How closely is your team working with appropriately impacted neighborhood councils? So back when we started the project, we did those briefings to the 6 neighborhood councils that intersect the study area. I think going forward, knowing that neighborhood councils they turn over and have new boards, we want to reach back out to neighborhood councils and get their thoughts on the plan thus far and what input they would like to provide. So Dorothy, if you are part of a neighborhood council, we look forward to reaching out to you. Okay, so I think this will be our last question, and I apologize if we were unable to get to your question. The questions feed is pretty impacted. We'll find a way to respond to your question offline. So Anthony asks, I understand one goal is to increase bike traffic and the use of public transit in the TNP, but I did not see any parking on the illustrations. Are there any land use incentives for parking structures in lieu of required parking on site? So as of this moment, there aren't any incentives for parking structures in the plan. I would love to hear more about your thoughts on that in more detail offline, but I can say that there are parking incentives within the community plan implementation overlay documents that already exist today that cover portions of their study area. And Anthony, maybe I could follow up with you on that to see if if those provisions match what you're looking for. Okay, so at this time it's 2:06. We've gone 7 minutes over. I appreciate everyone that attended today. Thank you for participating. Again, if you've asked a question, we'll try and find a way to answer your question offline. And we'll also send a follow-up email with that story map tool if you haven't seen it yet, as well as a survey to better capture your feedback. Okay, so with that, thank you everyone for participating today. We hope you have a safe and great week. Thank you.